History has always been a topic that I've been interested in. In fact, it was the best subject that I had in grade school, high school, and whatever. I told Steve the other day, I said, we watched Jeopardy in the afternoon. And when I was in high school, we had to take the public bus, the city bus, back to high school. Back from high school, home, and so forth. Well, there were a group of us that got on eventually on the bus, and so we'd ride maybe 45 minutes, almost an hour, to get to the bus stop where the school bus would pick up. Well, here we were, a bunch of young kids sitting in the back of the bus, and we would play trivia, each trying to stump the other, like, what's the largest city in Australia? Like, how many people will really know that? Well, that was a trick question, because even though Sydney was the largest in population, it was not the largest in area, so you had to figure out the subtlety of the question. But in every time period of history, if you consider that there are always these waves of retreating and progressing to the point where it almost seems that the scripture is echoing this, right? The prophet Joel is written in the time when Israel was collapsing. So it had come from the glorious time of David and Solomon, and now it was collapsing. The reason was because, of course, the surrounding nations got more powerful, had bigger armies and better weapons than Israel, and so they were sent out or hell-bent on conquering larger pieces of territory. And poor little Israel and Judah got crushed in the middle of that. And so Joel is writing in a time when, in remembering that glorious time of their kingdom, but seeing that they are being destroyed, now the prophecy comes that there will come a time when not to worry. Yeah, right, every time somebody says that, right, what do? You worry. So not to worry, but God's going to come at a time in the future when we will once again be restored. And that's a part of what the image is. That the old men will dream dreams, and the young men will have visions, and the daughters and the mothers. And it just seems like this is a time of thinking that in the middle of collapse that there will be a restoration. And that at that time, God's going to pour the Spirit out upon humanity. It's no wonder that Peter picks that up, right? That was kind of a longing amongst the people of Israel, that there would come a time, now in their thinking, the time would be to restore the glories of the kingdom of David and Solomon. In fact, I think that's a part of the theological connection that often is made where Jesus is the son of David. That Jesus is going to restore the glorious kingdom. Literally, the political, the economic, the social kingdom that had existed. And by that time, it has become very romanticized and much enlarged in the storytelling beyond what was possible, right? I always say that the royal spin doctors that supported David and Solomon blew things out of proportion to impress everybody with whatever power the king might have had or maybe didn't have. And so you impress people with how big the story can get. Well, in any event, as Peter picks this up, it's in this context now, and look where they are. They're back in that room. So we go from the Acts reading where they're in the upper room to the reading in the Gospel of John where we are back at the beginning of Easter. And notice we've come full circle, right? And remember, I said that this is one of the important ways to distinguish between what we normally do historically, think in a linear fashion, in a secular way. A linear fashion, events happen, and we just kind of keep going along this line out there to infinity somewhere. But in the divine reality, that time is not marked on a line with events, but rather time is done in a cyclical or a circular way. So that we seem like we go around and we come and there we are thinking it's an ending, but it's a beginning, and we go back around, but hopefully we're making progress as we're going along. Hopefully, I say. Not always convinced these days that we are progressing forward. It seems like we're in that regressing mode, sort of like being on a seashore, right? The waves come in, and each time they come in a little bit further if the tide's coming in, and they go out, and you stand further back, and, well, anyway, you know how that picture, you got an image, all right? A few weeks ago, or just a couple of weeks ago, they had this wonderful story of a Little League game, and there in the middle of the Little League game comes one of those dust devils, and the poor little girl who was the catcher gets caught up in the dust devil, and this thing is swirling around her, and she's just like caught up, and you're going to think, like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz being carried off somewhere, and the umpire has to rush over and grab her out of the dust devil. You have to imagine, think of those times coming up, right, in the monsoon, when we get those clouds, you can just see them on the horizon, right? How they ever got the name Haboob, I don't know what that has to do with the United States or America or North America or even the Native Americans. That's not even a Native American word. But anyway, a Haboob, right? You get those Sirocco winds that blow in. Every once in a while, Europe is just covered in the dust of Africa because the winds, and it's one of those kinds of winds, right? And sometimes you can outrun them. Don't ever try to outrun them because it'll eventually catch you, right? And you just get covered in dust, and there you are, lost in the midst of this dust storm. I have to imagine that, notice the language, it says, the sound of a rushing violent wind. This is not just a, blow, like that. This is so strong of wind that you can't second guess it. Now, part of the telling of the story, remember, in this circular, how did the whole of creation get started? If it wasn't God's breath coming on creation in such fashion that the breath had to be strong enough to begin shaping creation, if you want to think of it symbolically and metaphorically. That God's Ruach, the breath of God, forms and shape. Well, maybe that's a part of what Acts is trying to suggest. That here we are in a time when the world seems to be stagnant, that this is the time of the Pax Romana. The peace of Augustus was over the whole. Notice that each one of those regions are territories in the Roman Empire of the day, suggesting that people had the peace and the wherewithal to travel wherever they wanted to go. If you can think of that possibly in the first century, without cell phones, without airplanes, electricity, so forth. Anyway, so they're able to travel. This is the Pax Romana, that everything seems hunky-dory, peaceful. There's no wars going on. Well, of course, you didn't have Fox News or CNN to stoke you to think there were no wars. But in any event, we're back to where we started. That this suggesting in the writing of Luke, that's where Acts comes from, that this is a moment when we are like there at the beginning, looking over creation as God's breath is shaping and forming it, that this is again that time when God is when God is reshaping and reforming creation. So this is a significant moment. But this is never to be taken just as a spiritual thing, right? It's going to be intended to be a reshaping and recreating of the earth itself in the way that the earth is stuck together, not physically, but the way that the political structures, the economic structures, the social structures of the earth are stuck together. That it's intended to influence, shape, and affect all of that. That's why you got the naming of these regions. Guess what? You people in Phrygia. Guess what, you people? And notice, it's not just Jews that are present. It's Cretan and Arabs, for God's sakes. Cretan and Arabs, those non-believers. Those people who don't even understand what the Torah or what God is about. They're even going to be affected. They're all caught up in this whole movement, almost to suggest, again, the circle around. Where else have you heard about people speaking in different tongues? Babel, the Tower of Babel. But there it's a dispersion. Here it's like everybody gathered there can hear them speaking in their own language. It's coming back together again. Perhaps that's the first act of the recreation. That what had been dispersed and broken, the divisions that exist, that the intent of God in this act of recreating is to bring it back into a wholeness. Back into a relationship where everybody who has their different languages all are gathered in a similar place, and it doesn't matter anymore because we're all going to understand one another. Maybe it won't have anything to do with words. It might be that we begin to understand one another based upon our common humanity that we have. Right? I told you that story one time on my first trip to China. And I just wanted to see, because we had been raised in this anti-communist, anti-China time period during the Cold War. And there I am standing in Tiananmen Square. And I don't know what I was thinking or where my mind was. And all of a sudden, my eyes caught parents playing with their children off to the side. And it dawned on me, these parents want the same thing for their children as parents in the United States want for their children. And I had been raised in a time to hate these people, as much as perhaps they were raised in a time to hate us. Imagine that in this whole scene of this whirling wind and the fire's a whole nother thing, right? That's the connection to Shavuot. Remember the scene at Sinai in the book of Exodus? There's fire and thunder and flashes of lightning. There we are, right there on Mount Sinai, when God is saying that here's how I want the world to look. And the Torah is given, not commandment, but Torah. Here's a way of life that is going to enable you as humanity to not just coexist, but to flourish and prosper together as a human people, as humanity on the earth. And there we are, the tongues of fire, indicating all kinds of things, right? All kinds of images should go through our mind when we hear that. And there we are. And in those final days, God's going to pour the Spirit out. And notice it's interesting, right? In the quote from Joel, it's not just the intelligentsia that's going to get the Spirit. It's not just the fat cats on Wall Street that's going to get the Spirit. It's even the slaves that are going to get the Spirit. Suggesting what? God doesn't discriminate who gets the Spirit, saying you have to be white, you have to be smart, you have to be male, you have to be powerful. Only they get the Spirit? No. Those who have nothing are going to get not just a little bit, they're going to get as much as everybody else. Isn't that? That's how the world is being created, at least this vision. This vision says everybody's going, and that's what the Corinthians reading is intended to say. One Sunday, in very long time ago in the church that I was at, we had lay readers, and one Sunday I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. The lay reader never showed up. I went out, announced from the pulpit before the service began. I said, we're in need of a reader. Would somebody please come forward and do the reading? Nobody showed up. So I got up in the pulpit, like Noel got up in the pulpit, and I said, since nobody came forward to read the readings, we're not going to have those readings. I'm not going to do the reading. I have my reading, the gospel. The lay readers have their readings, and since no lay reader... Anyway, a long story I need to short, because Steve is saying, make it short, get to the point, right? Somebody after the service came up and said, I didn't think I could do that. I said, what? Well, I didn't think... Can you read, I said? They said, yes. I said, then why couldn't you do that? Well, she just never thought that she could do the reading. Perhaps because priests or ministers before told her she couldn't do that. And I was trying to say is, hey, you're baptized. You can do it. There's no distinction to be made. You don't have to be ordained to do the reading. You don't have to even be trained as a reader. You don't have to be commissioned as a minister. All you have to do is, can you read? Read. That's the gift that has been given you. And by the way, again, right, if that's true, then we have to say, as the reading suggests, that everybody has a gift. No one can sit back and say, I don't have anything to give. How often do we hear that? In whatever it is. I don't have anything to give. What? You're human, right? You have something to give. Your humanity, your insight, your opinion, whether we like it or not. You have an opinion. You have the ability to think and to speak, and even those who don't have those abilities have gifts. And perhaps their gifts are to draw out of us the gifts of compassion and understanding and patience. Perhaps that's the gifts that they have. So you see that in this vision, because what does our world tell us? If you're not educated, you can't do this. We're telling people right now that I'm not even concerned or interested in whether you have the physical ability or the mental ability, that if you're going to receive aid from this country, you have to work. And so, are they going to go out and try to help to find work for people who are in wheelchairs, who maybe have autism? Are they going to? No, but you have to work to get money. That's a discrimination against the possibility that that person has a lot to give, and we just haven't found the way to accept it and to welcome the gift. And so you see, our world says, if you can't do this, then you don't do it. You can't do this, you can't. You see, if you're not rich enough, you don't get access to the right country clubs. If you don't dress the right way, if you wear certain rainbow colors, sorry. If you dress up, even though you may be male, but you're dressing up as a woman, you can't participate. Our world, in the regression of where we thought we were going, is already setting people apart to make it that the same way that the Tower of Babel divided and separated people. But this vision of Pentecost says that ain't the way it is with God. That God doesn't discriminate, separate, or draw distinctions. In Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave or free, gay or straight, white or black. That all of those distinctions that we make that separate and divide us doesn't exist in this vision of God's world. And that's what Pentecost is intending to say. But here's another part of it. Notice how the Gospel of John describes it. We're back to Easter. And maybe you forgot that scene that we have in the Gospel today. We read that on Easter. And Jesus comes and stands. They're locked in a room because of their fears. Because maybe they had believed the spin doctors that told them that they were good for nothing deadbeats from Galilee. That they have begun to believe the press releases that because they're strange and different and had lowly menial jobs that they were good for nothing and that they would never have access to the wealth of the world. Their fear, locked behind their fears. Jesus, as the vision of God always works, walks right through that fear and stands in their midst and doesn't chastise or castigate them for being in fear, but rather says, peace. I'm giving you the greatest peace. And you have to know we're back again to the beginning. In Hebrew, right? Peace is shalom. That Genesis describes a moment in time when there was shalom, that there was this harmony and balance, albeit probably idealized and romanticized, but that was a moment when even the animals and the humans coexisted in a relationship and a bond of fellowship. And Jesus walks through that fear and all of those walls and barriers of generations of people being told that they're good for nothing. And he says, that's the wrong narrative. He doesn't say that, but we can say that. He says, peace. Peace I give you. And he says it twice, just in case they couldn't hear it the first time. And notice he says, what are you doing here? I'm sending you as agents and instruments and caregivers of this, the greatest gift that God can give, shalom to the world. And the second thing is, notice, it's said in the legalese language of John, but I hear it this way. And how does peace come about? By reconciling people, forgiving, knitting back the brokenness, making whole again the world. That the mission is not to name the differences, but to show that the differences don't matter anymore. Jesus says, this is how this vision of these days, thinking of Joel, that in those days, in this day, the task before us is not to let that fear and those old stories drive how we respond to one another, but rather to let this vision, we are one in that Spirit of God. It's the same Spirit that animates everybody's gift. That should be an indication that it is about the unity that we have in oneness with each other, in the diversity that we represent. There isn't one gift. There are multitudes of gifts, some that probably we haven't even discovered yet. Shalom is the way the world is to be. And we do it by healing, reconciling, forgiving, making whole, accepting the diversity of gifts, and recognizing the common humanness that we have with each other. I started out by saying that women were present there. And so it should, again, remind us that it doesn't just come to one set of people, but rather it comes for all people. I have to believe that even that upper room had the children along the sidelines, right? Where they were involved so much in this story that they already knew. Why? Because they were accepted for who they were in the community, as much as the adults were. Pentecost is about the way that we understand the inclusiveness of God and the explicit command. And here it's as violent, it's intended to be as strong as that wind that entered that room. The command, this is the only thing that matters for you. Bring shalom to the world and do it by way of forgiveness and healing. That's the only thing that matters. And do so with the integrity of matching your own words with your actions. That's what Pentecost is about.